Greetings, I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to build this truck. This is, as the box says, a German 6x4 towing truck Kfz 69. Hehehehe, 69. And it's towing a 3.7cm PaK gun. This is, obviously, a Tamiya kit in 48th scale. Inside the box, we find a number of sprues, all neatly moulded in dark grey plastic, except for the clear sprue, which is moulded in clear plastic. Tamiya are quite consistent with their quality, which is high, and this kit is no exception. The parts are as neat as I would expect, and I do expect them to be very neat. There are minimal mould lines, so only a small amount of cleanup is going to be needed. I pretty much say the exact same thing when I build these Tamiya kits, and well, they are quite good. Some of my favourite to build, in fact. The details are quite good. Obviously they're not what you might call super detailed, but they are good, and more than sufficient for the average modeller's needs. Tamiya's 48th scale kits are usually also quite easy to put together. The parts are usually made in such a way that there isn't going to be much guesswork as to how they go together. I feel like that makes them a very good option for a beginner. You get a well-made kit that shouldn't fight you, and will give you a nice looking result fairly quickly. The kit includes one sprue for the 37mm gun, which is not overly complicated, and I guess if you only want the truck, you could easily omit this. I'm sure the bits box would be really happy with this. There's also a sprue of crew figures.
And I guess you're not going to build those, are you, Herbert?
Well, no, probably not, but it is nice to have the choice. Here's that clear part I mentioned. There's not much to it, it's just a windshield. I did actually forget to temporarily attach this at the end of the video, so you won't be able to see it, and I'm sure you'll be very disappointed. Here's the decal sheet. There's a few markings here for a few different variations, but not a whole lot of variety, but I'm sure this is enough for what most people will do with this kit. You can always find aftermarket decals if you need them. And finally, the instructions. These are about what I would expect from a Tamiya kit like this, because, like I said, they're very consistent. There's nothing too fancy here, but they do the job quite well. It is a fold-out sort of thing, so I have minor complaints about that, which you've probably heard a million times. But really, they are perfectly functional. Everything is laid out neatly, and the diagrams are easy to read and follow. Let us use those instructions to guide us in the gluing together of bits of plastic. I start with the frame, which is this bit here.
Gee, thanks, Captain Obvious.
I glue some little steppy things into place, which is pretty simple, but do make sure that you're putting the correct part on the correct side, and that they're not upside down. That would be silly. I follow that with this bar thing. It's got a little bump in it, and there's guide pins to help position it. Then there's a towing hook, which goes on the rear of the frame, because that's the end from which the vehicle will tow. Obviously you want to get this around the right way, otherwise it's not going to work. On either side of the towing hitch there's a couple of hooks, and I'm assuming those are for chains related to towing. Or maybe they're decorative. Who knows? The exhaust system is next, and most of it is already mounted onto the frame, but we've got the end part, which goes on here like so. It's nothing too tricky, though you may have to nudge it a bit to get it nice and straight. There's also a forward section of the exhaust, which pretty much just drops neatly into place. Next, I make these boxes. There are 4 of these, and they're rather simple to put together. I set them aside to bond, and then I glue the backrests for the seats onto this large bit, and this is just about as simple as it looks, which is to say it is very simple. This piece of wood then goes on the top here. I've no idea what it is, but it does have wood grain moulded into it, so that's nice. I then put this whatever it is on. I think it's either a triangular shaped fuel can or some sort of box. Next, I tried to install the 4 boxes that I put together a moment ago, and initially I had some trouble. It turns out that even though they do look the same, there are specific places for each one. So I took my time and test fit them all, and then glued them where they fit the best. It was a very moderate inconvenience, but nothing too difficult, and in the end, we've got 4 boxes for the crew to store stuff. Probably sauerkraut. That assembly can then be joined to the frame like so. There are helpful guide pins, and I decided to add extra glue to whatever contact points I could find, just so that the glue god would be happy with me. The fit is pretty good, though I did still feel a need to apply a little bit of pressure. Now I build the rear suspension dealies. These do look a little bit complicated, but in this kit they go together nice and easily. Each axle assembly, I'll call them, is made up of 3 pieces. All you've got to do is make sure that you put them together the right way up. Pretty simple. When you've got both of them together, there's I don't know what you would call it, a suspension-y thing, and it's pretty simple to use these to join both axle assemblies together. I use the work surface to support the parts when applying pressure so that it all stays lined up nice and neat. Why not then add those to the frame? The keying makes it really easy to get these into place nice and straight. I think it looks rather good, and it looks more complicated than it actually is to put together. At the front, there's a steering axle part, which is nice and easy to install. And now, we're ready to add wheels. But instead of doing that, I work on the cab. First, I glue the 2 halves of the cab rear together, which is pretty simple. The parts are shaped such that they pretty much just drop together. On the rear of it, above the 2 moulded on shovels, I add this. It is a little bit fiddly, but not too difficult to get into place. Then I glue the sides onto the cab seat thing. These are shaped in such a way that, unless you're really determined, it'll be pretty hard to put these on wrong. The gear levers are slightly fiddly to install, owing to their thin rod-like nature, but it wasn't too difficult, and I think I even got them in the right places, mostly because I followed the instructions and didn't just guess. Onto the rear of that assembly, I glue the backrest and rear wall part that I put together earlier, and now that it's together, why not glue it onto the frame? Like the rear section, the keying is quite helpful here, and we're starting to get something that looks like what it's meant to look like. This here is the rear section of the engine compartment, I guess you might call it. I glue this dashboard to it, though really it's not much of a dashboard, I just don't know what else to call it. What matters is this part needs to go here, so I put it here. I then glue the front grille onto the engine compartment part, which makes sense, and this goes together nice and easily. Why not glue both of those assemblies together now? There's nothing too difficult here, though you may need to apply some gap minimizing pressure, and onto the frame it goes, as easy as you like. The next thing I do is attach the headlamp covers into place on the lamps. Makes sense, right? These are keyed, so it should be easy to get them around the right way. And now, time for wheels. They all look the same from the outside, but the front and rear wheels are different on the inside, and they all need these little filler parts glued into them. We end up with 6 wheels ready to be installed. Instead of installing them, I add these little, I don't know what you would call them, covers that go over the spare wheels. They're almost like little mud guards. Either way, they're not especially difficult to position, just make sure that the bar thing hanging down from the back wall is sitting in the little holes on the cover things. Now seem to be as good a time as any to install the headlamps. There are little slots at the bottom of the sides on the radiator area for these. Looking at these now, they don't seem to be on perfectly neatly, but they are on, and neat enough for me. Perhaps they've taken a bit of battle damage or something.
That's your excuse for everything, Herbert.
And I'm going to stick to it. You know what might be fun? Adding wheels, so let's do that. This is simple enough to do. You just add glue, and then stick the wheels onto the little axle-y nubbins, and obviously, you should make sure that you're using the correct wheels for the front and rear. There is a little bit of play in these parts, but nothing a little bit of nudging can't take care of. Now, let's talk about a mistake I made.
Herbert making a mistake? Surely not.
I was not paying enough attention to the instructions, and forgot to install the steering column, which is kind of important. It mounts partly on the inside of the engine compartment, and you're meant to install it before putting that onto the frame. Fortunately, I was able to kajigger it into place, though it's not perfect. It sits back a tiny bit too far, but it does the job well enough for me. I add the steering wheel next, which is what made me realise that I'd forgotten the steering column. Funnily enough, you can't install the steering wheel if you don't have a steering column. I follow that by adding the spare wheels, which I forgot to video myself doing, but they simply slot onto the little nubbins there. Now, how about we add some more detail-y bits, like the front bumper. This isn't particularly difficult to install, you'll just have to do a bit of nudging to make sure the bumper is on at the right angle. We don't want it hanging down or hanging up. Next, we have this, I think it's a jack. It's a something, and it goes here on the front left wall of the cab. In the gap between the front left mudguard and the engine compartment, we have this flag-looking thing. I understand these to be some sort of placard holder. It is a bit fiddly to get into just the right position, but I think I've done that here. On the rear of the truck, I add this gun rack. Please insert nice rack joke here. This rack is pretty easy to put into place. there is actually another pair of rifles that should be mounted toward the front of the truck, but I left those off. My reason being because I'm also leaving the crew off. I figure those rifles might have been taken by the crew. That's my story anyway. On the rear left, I add a license plate, or at least something that looks like a license plate. Then, mud flaps can be glued into place hanging down from the little step-like things at the rear. I follow those with these little, I don't know what you would call them, foot holders? I assume these are for the guys in the back seats to put their feet into anyway. It is easy enough to get them into place, but do make sure that you are putting them on the correct side of the vehicle. On the back of the gun rack, I add this spare wheel. It does seem like a good idea to carry quite a few spare wheels. A pair of pickaxes come next, and there's no keying for these, so you've got to eyeball their position, and I think I've got them close enough to where they should be. On the front of the cab, I install a pair of rear view mirrors. These are good for looking backwards without the arduous task of turning your head around. They're not too hard to get into place, though a little bit of nudging was needed. I guess this might be the point where you also install the clear windshield part, but as you might assume, I'm leaving that off so that I don't have to mask it when it comes time to paint. Next, I add the little ball-on-stick corner of vehicle markers. Somebody usually tells me what these are called and I always forget. These do require a little bit of fiddling to get into the correct position, and I think I've got them more or less into the right spot. That's the truck itself completed, so now it's time for the gun. I start with the gun trails, onto the ends of which we glue these little spade bits. You may need to do a bit of nudging to get these parts lined up nice and neatly, but nothing too drastic. Then, on one of the trails, we add this rod. I've no idea what it is or what it does, other than it does go here. Both trails have this little handly bit. I assume these are so the gun crew can lift the trails up and move them around. Next, I glue the bottom of the gun to the main gun barrel part, and that goes together pretty easily. I follow that by adding the end of the gun barrel, you know, the business end, the bit where the pew-pew comes out of. This was kind of fiddly to get positioned nice and straight, and it's very easy to accidentally knock it out of place. If I was to do this again, I would probably put this part on last. Connecting the gun trails to the, I guess, central frame part is a little bit fiddly, at least if you want them to be able to move. It would be a bit easier if you just glue this all together, which I did eventually do. Having it movable does give you more options though, such as having the gun deployed or in towing mode.
So many choices!
This, trunnion bit, I'm not sure what you call it, is a little bit fiddly to put together, but obviously not impossible. The gun is then squeezed into this assembly, and the retaining knobs should hold it there. I have left it so that you can move the parts for now, but you could glue it all together at this point if you wanted. Now for some fiddly little bits and pieces. I'm pretty sure most of the things I'm adding here are gun controls, like elevation and depression. They're not the easiest things to get into the right places, because they are quite small, but thankfully we don't have to rely on our fat fingers and we can use tools to help put them on. These handles go onto the ends of the rods, and again, it's fiddly but not impossible. The handles are both different. I'm pretty sure I put them both into the correct position. I'm sure if I didn't, somebody will get mad about it in the comments. Connecting the gun to the carriage is simple, at least in theory, and it should just clip into place. But to do that you'll need to apply some pressure to the gun, more than I was confident in doing. I trimmed the bits a bit, so the gun assembly could just slip into place. Then I used glue to make sure that it would stay there. You can see I've nudged the front part of the gun out of place, and it's not hard to fix, but it is annoying to have to do so. The gun shield comes next, and there's a bunch of contact points for this which makes it pretty easy. A little bit of pressure was needed, and again, you can easily nudge the gun out of place doing this. Just don't though, I guess. I then glue the gun trails together, using the little ring thing here to make sure things were lined up good and neat. Though I did, after this clip, pull it apart again and put the trails back together the other way. It just fit a little bit better with the one I initially put on the bottom on top, if that makes sense. The final step is to add these wheels. Wheels should make it much easier to tow this around. Unsurprisingly, it's very easy to put these onto the little axle knobs. It's also unsurprising that you may need to do a bit of nudging to get them to sit nice and straight. And that's it. The Tamiya 48 scale 6x4 towing truck Kfz 69, nice, with a 3.7cm PaK gun is now completed. and I'm pretty satisfied with how this model has turned out. Not at all surprising though, I've come to expect these Tamiya 48th scale kits to be pretty good. The build was pretty easy. There were obviously a couple of fiddly bits here and there, but nothing that I would consider excessive or especially difficult. I can't remember if I put this together in 1 or 2 short streams. Either way though, it didn't take a whole lot of time to build. That's one of the things I like about these Tamiya kits. You can have a good time putting them together, and in a pretty short amount of time, you end up with a finished product with good detail and a minimum of frustration. And that's one of the reasons I would suggest these Tamiya kits for beginners. They're not as cheap as, say, an Airfix kit might be, but they're a much better and consistent quality, and they're probably not going to be frustrating for a beginner because the fit is so good. This particular kit is rather nice, though I did find the way the gun goes together a tiny bit annoying, but that really is the only complaint I can think of. If you've got any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section below. If you want to watch me build kits like this one live on stream, head on over to my Twitch channel. The link is in the description below. If you've not already done so, why not subscribe here on YouTube for the low price of $0? Or if you've got more than $0 and you can afford to do so, and you want to help Herbert Erpaderp do Herbert Erpaderp things, as well as see my videos a bit early, consider becoming a patron. You can find links to Patreon and all of my other things like Discord and social media in the description below. And as always, I shall return soon, so until then, be excellent to each other, have a wonderful day, and thanks for watching. Farewell.